Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 47. I'm Enigmius, and today we're continuing the Serpovectem build. We're actually finishing the main structural elements. This is the last episode where we're going to be working on big parts of the ship, because after this episode it'll all be done. We are going to have some smaller details to add just for the sake of kind of giving a more finished appearance. But in terms of large things that take a lot of time to lay out and kind of build out, this is it. And the one area that I wanted to start with was this underside. And I was talking towards the end of the last episode about how I had some ideas that I wanted to maybe kind of consider at least putting on the underside of the ship, because it just seemed a little bit bare towards the front. But I wasn't convinced at the time that that was the direction I was going to take. And then after I had a day or so to think about it, I realized that the only reason why I wouldn't put something here, especially if I felt that it would fit and that it would enhance the overall look of the ship, is because I didn't want to add anything more. We'll say laziness, even though I don't necessarily think that that word applies in a lot of cases when we're talking about the things that we do in our hobbies. But it was a case of, you know, the back of my mind would be saying it would really be better if you added this, and then the front of my mind was saying, yeah, but I really don't want to. So the back of my mind won out in this case, and in the end I'm glad that it did, because I think that this is sort of an element that does for the underside what those two little pods that we put in the last episode didn't do, which is kind of fills it out, gives the ship a feeling of 3D completion, whereas if we hadn't done a little bit extra, it's the wings sort of things on the side that would have dominated the sort of perspective, and then it ends up feeling kind of 2D because it looks flat from any sort of angle that you look at it, it ends up looking flat. So the general theme for this piece, as you've probably already put together from watching what we've got in place, is it's the same kind of shape as the other things that we've added elsewhere on the ship, just sort of extending out, and it's got that sort of curve on the outside, and then it curves back in towards a central connection point on the inside, and that's basically the long and the short of it. And then we do a little bit of an extension on the outer edge. We make it a little bit wider just because, and then we fill in the remainder with just like a thin set of plates to make it look like a solid piece that's got a little bit of mass to it, a little bit, not a lot. And in this case, much like the other ones that we've done, I'm not adding any equipment into the void in between the plates. We did that with the piece that we added in the last episode on the top. We added some stuff, and I don't regret adding that stuff, but in this case, I went for the thinner sort of profile on that connecting piece. So all we would really have is a 2-unit wide void in between the pieces, what I would call a 1-block wide void, because you know, if you use the smallest unit, it's kind of like a square or a cube that's cut in half across one of the axes. That's the smallest unit. So that would be the smallest unit. Technically a cube would be 2 of those, but I refer to it as blocks because cubes, and that's the unit that I tend to use, is the cube and not the rectangle. And that's how wide it is. It's not an especially large part of the ship, and it wasn't intended to be. So I thought, I really, at one point I kind of looked at it and said, well, I'm starting to close it in, and if I'm going to add anything, now's the time. And then I realized that for the amount of space that I had, the time and the effort to layer in all those extra blocks, getting it to fit within the profile of this particular piece of the ship, just wasn't going to create the kind of benefit that would make it worthwhile. As you can see now, we're starting to make it a little bit wider for this central main thin section that we're going to kind of fill out a little bit, and then we'll go down to the outer edge and we'll do what we did elsewhere. We'll kind of make it so that it's got a little bit more heft to it. It's got something going on the outer edge that draws your attention, albeit briefly, and suggests sort of a balance, I guess. If they were all just sort of flat extending out of the ship, I kind of feel like anything like that, especially on a spaceship, just looks like it's really, really flimsy, really, really pointless. And for something this size, I would prefer to avoid that. I don't mind it in smaller details where you look at it and it doesn't look like it needs to be any kind of robust or, you know, solid. But for these pieces, I think they're large enough and they're significant enough in the overall design that it's worth filling them out a little bit and giving them that little bit of extra mass so that they look like they can withstand something. Not necessarily anything significant, but better than nothing. And in this case, it's really just working with the slope blocks. We've got the curve along the outer edge that we're following. That's the line that we're building on. And then we've got this very soft curve perpendicular to that sort of defines the shape of this outer edge that we're creating. And I learned with the other pieces that it pays to just keep it simple and just kind of go with the easiest route possible, because as soon as I start trying to get complicated, that's when things stop fitting. Sometimes it's good, it's challenging when things don't fit, because I usually end up coming up with something that works, and it takes a while, and I almost always learn something from the process. But in this case, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've got sort of a theme going, various other aspects of the ship. They're very, very similar. If I wanted to do something a little bit more elaborate, this isn't the time, I guess you could say. There's always the difficulty when I just start a session and I just start building versus when I'm just ending a session. And the decisions that I make when I'm just ending the session tend to be more along the lines of finish it and do it right, but don't push it. And then the ones at the beginning are the more optimistic and enthusiastic, where I have the crazier ideas, and I'll spend a certain amount of time trying to work on those and get things a little bit different. But in this case, I just decided we're closing in on completion. I don't want this to be a largely different element from the other ones. We'll just kind of keep doing what we've got. So you can see I'm just basically widening the inside edge now so that we can fill in that central piece, that flat section, and it'll be done. We don't have to mess around with it. And that's what I did. I didn't think it was that interesting watching me fill it in. But we finished it off. The underside, you'll see it as we kind of scroll around here and look at it. And then scrolling around and looking at it, I realized that the top section looked like it needed something. It's the last part of the ship where we didn't really have anything. And the more I thought about it, I considered doing another one of these sort of fin-like things, maybe a little bit smaller than the one we've got towards the back there. And it was starting to feel a little bit repetitive, because we've got one on the top, one on the bottom, the two little pods on the bottom that are similar, but, you know, obviously a little bit different. And then we've got the ones extending out the sides. So I decided in this case, I would go for something that kind of resembles like a bridge, like an elevated bridge section. So the profile from the side will be very similar to what we've been adding, but the profile from the front and the back will be wider. It'll be beefier. It will have a certain amount of extra mass to it, and it'll be the kind of structure that I would feel comfortable adding turrets to, for example. So there's nothing really complicated about it, and I was kind of glad, because I didn't necessarily want complicated at this point, but I did want to make sure that whatever I put in place blended as well as I could with the rest of the ship. The idea here is that it's going to be sort of halfway between the very front profile of the ship, that very original sort of front section of the ship, and the cosmetic bits that we've placed since then, with the, you know, the sweeping curve on the outside edge and that sort of general idea. So it's going to be wide, it's going to be flat, it's going to be kind of beefy looking, but it's going to have the curves that are very, very similar to the profile of the things that we've added. And the whole idea is that hopefully, as a result of that, it looks a little bit different, but it still blends with the rest of the ship. And additionally, has a little bit of mass to it, so that it has some staying power. If we put turrets on it, we don't have to worry so much about the state of the turrets. I still haven't decided what we're going to do for defenses with the ship, whether we're going to do the integrity field generators or shields or both. I kind of get the impression the way things are going, we might be able to do both. I'm not sure it's necessarily the wisest thing to do at this point, but I'll sit down and I'll kind of figure it out and decide if we want to have mixed defenses or if we want to put all our eggs in one basket, etc., etc. The one thing that this ship won't currently have, based on what's available to me, is point defense turrets. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't know at what point we can expect to be encountering bad guys that are firing torpedoes. But I do know that the ship is designed in such a way that we've got lots of places that we can put point defense turrets to help us against those. And then it's a question of, are we defending against lasers? Are we defending against kinetic weapons, cannons, railguns, things like that? And all of that is kind of unknown to me because all of the things that I've been fighting up to this point, as far as I know, have been using kinetic ammunition. And in the limited amount of exploration that I've done, I haven't really encountered anything other than that. So I'm inclined to stick with the options that are going to protect me against what I know. But I also know, based on the little bit of fiddling around I've done starting to place things on the inside of the ship, that we have quite a bit of room. And I think we're going to be limited only by our imagination in terms of what we're going to be able to get out of the ship for defenses. But we'll see. There's the work in progress concept definitely applies. You can see now how this is starting to fill out. And you see those ridges that I've placed along the edge. And those were just to kind of add a little bit of visual interest and also to further differentiate that this is a slightly different structural elements from the other ones that we've got sticking out the sides and the top and the bottom of the ship. Those bits don't have those ridges, obviously. They're a little bit different. And this kind of gives the impression that we've got multiple decks, maybe, that we're working with. I've thought of filling in those ridges with the light blocks. I'm not convinced yet if that's the sort of thing that I'll end up doing. I think it's the kind of thing that could backfire. We've got some obviously in the elliptical section that I think work well. If I put some in this particular part of the ship, I would feel like it would need something on the underside as well. Not necessarily anything enormous, but something just to kind of, again, go for a sense of balance when you're looking at it. But there's always options when we start doing the little cosmetic additions that we could do that we could find some places on the underside where we could put some subtle but present lighting so that we can come back here and fill in with the light blocks and have something that looks kind of neat and also is balanced with what's going on with the rest of the ship. So I'll keep an eye on that when I do the cosmetic passes and see if we can't come up with something that works. That's sort of the key, is conceptually the idea of having lights in those little strips is appealing to me, but I also know that just placing them there isn't going to be enough. I won't be satisfied just placing them there. That'll need something somewhere else to balance it off. So I'm keeping that in mind as I go, as opposed to just charging in and then forcing myself into a bad situation. Now this part here in the back, it's a little bit difficult to see what I'm doing because the more involved we get with the ship, the farther along we get, the longer it takes for those red fields to disappear when we delete blocks. And it's sometimes impossible to even work in that area, depending on what kind of blocks you've removed and how many and all that other stuff that determines how thick the field is. But I was trying to kind of clean out the inside of the ship, getting ready to start putting some equipment in there, and I encountered the the root block, as they call it in this game. And I remembered at one point there was a method that you could use to move the root block that involved, I think, turning off safe mode and then removing it, and then the game would automatically assign a new one as nearly as possible to the center of mass for the ship, something like that. So that's what I did. I turned off safe mode, I highlighted the root block, and I removed it, and it deleted the entire ship. So I went to place the ship from the latest autosave. I didn't lose any progress, so you know, it wasn't a source of frustration. It was just a minor thing to replace it from the saved ship menu, and I got a warning that placing the ship may take some time, during which time the game won't respond because there are so many blocks. It could slow things down, and also because of that, there may be some slowing down of the game just as you're playing, because there's so many blocks on the ship. And this is actually a smaller ship than the Samson, but it does have a lot more curved detail, which tends to lend to that block count. And also, I haven't done the merge spam that I usually do at the end of a build, so that we get all of the blocks that can be merged, just to kind of cut down on that block count. But it's definitely, I understood where they were coming from when they said there's a lot of blocks, but I was a little bit surprised that we're to the point now where the game is actually warning us that building the ship from the saved ship's menu could cause the game to freeze for a short time, and that ships with this many blocks can cause severe slowdowns. That explains why those red fields don't go away very quickly anymore. Sometimes they do. I had a case where I loaded in, and the first thing I did was I removed some things. That was one of the first things I wanted to do to get started, and they just disappeared immediately with no red checkered field. But that didn't last. Sooner or later, they all just linger. So that's it for this episode. We're going to let you see this last little bit, finishing it off. Next episode, we're going to have all of the equipment inside the ship. It's too dark and too boring to show you guys all of the little details of putting all of the equipment inside the ship. We'll talk about what we put inside and give you the general idea of where we put it. But we aren't going to show you the entire process, because I just don't think it's something that you'll miss a lot of by not seeing. It's just one of those things that we can talk about and give you the general idea. Cosmetic details, paint, shakedown, blueprint. So we're just about done. And if you want to be notified about the next episode, see where we end up, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.